word. And Shabbat Shalom. This evening, we would like to honor those who have served as essential workers. I don't know how many of them are on tonight, but maybe they'll watch the recording if they're not. So welcome everybody, Shabbat Shalom. We're going to begin with a musical adaptation of the priestly blessing written by Elliot Levine, not the priestly blessing, but the music. And this is actually in our Torah portion this week. So Elliot.
This one actually is by Saul Zim, the great cantor.
Oh, sorry. The one at the end is yours. And Susie Kopel is going to lead us in the candle blessing.
You're muted, Susie.
Susie, you're muted. There you go.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvot v'tzivanu lahadlik ner shel Shabbat. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. And Elliot will lead us in the Kiddush.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hagafen. Amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'ratzavanu v'shabbat kodesha be'ahava u'v'ratzon hinchilanu zikaron lema'aseh bereshit ki hu yom techila lemikra kodesh Zecher Letzion Mitzrayim Kivanu v'charta Ve'otanu kidashta Mikol ha'amim Ve'shabbat kodshecha Be'ahava u'v'ratzon Inchaltanu Baruch atah Adonai Mekadesh HaShabbat. Amen.
L'chaim. So this week's Torah portion, Naso, presents us with the interesting and somewhat baffling character of the Nazir, the Nazirite. A Nazirite takes upon him or herself a vow requiring 3 restrictions. 1, not to eat anything that comes from grapes, no wine, grape juice, or even raisins. 2, not to cut one's hair. And 3, not to defile oneself by coming into contact with a dead body. As long as the Nazirite is under the authority of the vow, the Nazirite may not even attend the funeral of his or her own parents. It seems like the Bible is ambivalent about the Nazirite. One of the biggest questions about it is, in fact, why is it that the Nazirite, when he completes or she completes the time of his or her vows, must bring a sin offering to the temple? According to Rabbi Ephraim Buchwald, some suggest that the Nazir brings the sin offering because he may have unwittingly come in contact with impurity during the period he was a Nazir. Others, like the Ramban, Nachmanides, suggest that the sin offering is because the Nazir is giving up his exalted lifestyle. The Meshech Chochmah, another commentator, on the other hand, regards a Nazirite as a sinner because he deprives himself of many of the positive things of life. We're meant to enjoy life and all that God has to offer us. In addition, this ascetic separatist lifestyle is not the ideal for Judaism. We are a communal religion, connected to one another and responsible to one another. And this is why we are so very thankful for all the essential workers in our community who, at great risk to themselves, continue to take care of us during the pandemic. Teachers, doctors, nurses, mail carriers, truck drivers, delivery people. We honor all of you and are very grateful to you. So I'm going to go into gallery view, and I'd like those of you who have been essential workers to raise your hand so we can acknowledge you. And Tiffany is definitely one. Steve Tick. Who else? Rick Landis, Jan Archibek. Anybody else here? I don't see other raised hands, but I'm sure there are more of you out there. And there are definitely people who are not on tonight, but as I said, I hope that they're going to tune in and watch the recording so we can thank all of them. So we continue with a song called Habayit Hazeh by Elliot, Levine. Habayit Hazeh, of course, is the house, the only house, the temple.
We'll try that again.
הבית הזה אשר אתה בונה, הבית הזה אשר אתה בונה, אם תלך בחוקותיי ואת משפטיי תעשה. ושמרת את כל מצוותיי ללכת בהם, ויקימות את עבריתך, אשר דיברתי את דוד אביך, ושכנתי בתוך בני ישראל, ולא אעזוב את עמי, ולא אעזוב את עמי את עמי ישראל.
And the reason that Elliot has that song tonight is because our Torah portion includes the setting up of the tabernacle in the wilderness, and it lists the gifts brought by the various tribes. These gifts are brought in honor of the tabernacle's consecration. The very first to offer gifts is Nachshon from the tribe of Judah. And he's also the person who took the first step into the Sea of Reeds before it finally split to let the escaping Israelites through. This is Ruth Brin's poem about that moment. It's called The Silver Bowl and the Golden Spoon. Here is the tale of Nachshon, the young prince of Judah, whose faith was very great. Because he was the very first to leap into the Red Sea, he was appointed first prince to bring his offering to the sanctuary. In humility and faith, he strode across the desert sands bearing high the silver platter. Behind him came members of his family, bringing the silver bowl and the golden spoon, while driving before them the young animals intended for the sacrifice. It is a consequence of faith, be it reward or penalty, that one who has faith leaps first into danger, and one who has faith is the first to sacrifice possessions and even self. Today, the silver vessels of the descendants of Nachshon are not empty, nor is the golden spoon exhausted. Like Abraham and Rebekah and the young prince, there are people in our day who have faith and its consequent qualities, courage, and the ability to sacrifice. We pray for them that they lead us through the seas of despair to the place of peace. And we continue with the Hatzi Kaddish.
יתגדל ויתגדל שמי רבה, ועלמא דברה חירותי וימליך מלכותי, בחייכון וביומכון, ובחיי דכל בית ישראל. פגלה בגלה, ובזמן קריב, ואמרו אמן. יהי שמי רבה מברך, לעלם ולעלמי עלמיה, יתברך, יתברך וישתבח, ויפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא, ויתהדר ויתעלה, ויתהלל שמי דקודשה בריחו, אלא מן כל ברכתה ושירתה, תושבחתה ונחמתה, דמירן בעלמה, ואמרו אמן.
And the Baruch Hu is the official call to worship. Before the Shema, we have two blessings. One blessing is a blessing about creation, and the second one is a blessing about Torah. The blessing about creation is the Ma'ariv Aravim, and this is an alternative by Richard N. Levy. Alone, I marvel at the evening sky, gold caressing blue, blue caressing dark. Here in prayer, I need to see your hand behind the sky, your creative words once more forming light in darkness. I need to see the care with which you carve the moon, the stars, which make a fearful darkness nurturing night. The mixture that brings evening forth from day, morning from night, has been shaped like Adam from the earth by you. You who mixes in the evening, you are praised. So God gives us God's Torah out of love, ahavat olam.
אהבת עולם, בית ישראל, עמך אהבת, עמך אהבת. תורה ומצוות, חוקים ומשפטים, אותנו לימדת, אותנו לימדת. על כן אדוני אלוהינו בשוכבנו ובקומנו נשיח בחוקיך, ונשמח בדברי תורתך ובמצוותיך לעולם ועד, כי הם חיינו ואורך ימינו, ובהם נגל יומם ולילה, נגל יומם ולילה. ואהבתך אל תסיר ממנו לעולמים, ברוך אתה אדוני אוהב עמו ישראל, אוהב עמו ישראל.
The Shema states that God is one, which means that we are all one. We are all connected to each other.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, Baruch Shem, Kevod Malchuto, Leolam Vaed.
That was an Elliot Levine original. Carol Lee, will you lead us in the Ve'ahavta, please?
Will that do? Want more?
ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודך, והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבבך, ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך ובשוכבך ובקומך, וקשרתם לאות על ידך, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך, למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי, והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם. אני אדוני אלוהיכם. Asher Hotzeti Etchem Me'eretz Mitzrayim Liot Lachem Elohim Ani Adonai Elohechem.
Thank you, Carol Lee.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure.
Our Torah portion includes the taking of a census. Last week, we took a census of the men of military age. This week, it's the census of the Levites. Now, technically, taking a census is dangerous. In Exodus, we read that God tells Moses, when you take a census of the Israelites to count them, each must give to God a ransom for his life at the time he is counted. Then no plague will come on them when you number them. And then hundreds of years later, when King David takes a census, God gets angry and 70,000 people die. So why does God order a census this week and last? According to Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, a divine census is very different than one initiated by human beings. It has to do instead with conveying to every member of the nation that he or she counts, that every person, family, household is held precious by God, that distinctions between great and small, ruler and ruled, leader and led are irrelevant, that we are each made in God's image, and we are each the object of God's love. A divine census is, as Rashi says, a gesture of endearment. That is why it cannot be described by the usual verbs for counting, limnot, lifkod, lispor, lachshov. Only the phrase naso, seu et rosh, lift the head, does justice to this kind of enumeration in which those entrusted with a task are commanded to lift the head of those they count, making every individual stand tall in the knowledge that they are loved, cherished, held special by God, and not merely a number, a cipher among the thousands and millions. And that's why our Torah portion is called naso. It means to lift the head. And all of our essential workers are each very precious to all of us and to God. The Michamocha, which we sang when the sea parted and allowed us to escape slavery in Egypt, is next.
Michamocha, Pa'elim Adonai, Michamocha, Pa'elim Adonai, Mikamocha, Nedar Kodesh, Norat Tehilot, Osefel, Norat Tehilot, Osefel, Michamocha, Pa'elim Adonai, Michamocha, Pa'elim Adonai, Michamocha, Pa'elim Adonai, Malchutecha ra'u banecha, Zeli, Zeli, Anu ve'ameru, Adonai yimloch le'olam va'ed, Adonai yimloch le'olam va'ed, Adonai yimloch le'olam va'ed.
So as I mentioned earlier, the priestly blessing, which is one of the oldest blessings in the Torah, is part of our Torah portion. And now Elliot and I would like to bless our essential workers with this blessing. And the music is, again, an original of Elliot's.
Yevarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha. Amen.
May God bless you and guard you.
Yair Adonai panav elecha v'choneka. Amen.
May the light of God shine upon you, and may God be gracious to you.
יישא אדוני פניו אליך וישם לך שלום. Amen.
May the presence of God be with you, and may God give you the most precious of all blessings, the blessing of peace, of shalom. And shalom and shalem are connected. Shalom means completeness. May you be complete in your lives. We continue with the tefillah.
Adonai sefatai tiftach ufi yagi tehilatecha. Eternal God, open my lips that my mouth may declare your praise. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei avotenu v'imotenu, Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, v'Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, v'Elohei Leah, Ha'el Hagadol Hagibor v'Hanora, Elyon, גומל חסדים טובים וקונה הכל וזוכר חסדי אבות ואימהות ומביא גאולה לבני בניהם למען שמו באהבה מלך עוזר ומושיע ומגן ברוך אתה אדוני מגן אברהם ועזרת שרה אתה גיבור לעולם אדוני, מחיי הכל אתה רב להושיע. מכלכל חיים בחסד, מחיי הכל ברחמים רבים, סומך נופלים ורופא חולים, ומתיר אסורים, ומקיים אמונתו, לשני עפר, מי כמוך בעל גבורות, ומדום מלך, מלך ממית ומחיה, ומצמיח ישוע, ונאמן אתה להחיות הכל. ברוך אתה אדוני מחיי הכל. אתה קדוש ושמך קדוש, וקדושים בכל יום, יהללוך סלה. ברוך אתה אדוני האל הקדוש.
Take a moment to pray silently.
Shalom Rav al Yisrael Amcha Tasim Le'olam. Shalom Rav al Yisrael Amcha Tasim Le'olam. Ki ata hu melech adon lechol ha-shalom. Ki ata hu melech adon lechol ha-shalom. V'tov b'necha lemarech et amcha Yisrael b'chol et ufosha b'shlomecha. Baruch atah Adonai, oseh hashalom.
All of us need peace. We take a moment now to think of those in need of healing, whether of body, of mind, or of spirit. We think of congregants and friends and family of congregants, Jonathan Davidson, Ben Henderson, Kara Gilman, Rabbi Steve Robbins, Gloria Mangus, Steve Lux, Leslie Ferris, Julie Lapidus, Pamela Mangus, Johnny Sikat, Dennis Boylan, Irene Sherman, Roberta Gershon, Bill Oppenheim, Juan Morial. And please feel free to add names in the chat or to say them out loud.
Diana Anderson, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and Alex Trebek.
This is the Mishabara.
Kirsten Walsh,
Sarah Gailey, Ron Jones, A. Peter Thorne, Greg Young, Patty Podnar, Amy Morton, Ruth and Sandra Landis, Alex Pavita, Raul Camacho, Kim Coe, Robert Helmbrecht, Meg Gailey, Joan Bertoli, Solomon Fishman, Elaine Burke, Jackson Griffin, Art Ochoa, Doug Black, Doug Hardy, Diane Fritsch, Jess Landis, and of course, all of those who were hurt during the recent war between Israel and Hamas. Please join us in the Misha Baroth, the prayer for healing.
May the source of strength, who blessed the ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say, Amen. Misheberach imotenu mekol habracha lavotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shelema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say, Amen.
Okay, I'm going to talk about Israel tonight, and I know that's kind of always challenging. So I thought what I'd do is present you with the background for what happened this past week. And I will also share with you a statement from the Union for Reform Judaism, and then maybe we'll chat for a bit. So this past war between Israel and Hamas was kind of a perfect storm. So Mahmoud Abbas, who is the head of the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank, called off elections. And I think he was worried that Hamas might have won that election. This was the first election in 16 years. Abbas has been in power for 16 years. And he has been holding on to power like so many others. So that was very distressing to the Palestinians in the West Bank. Also, as you know, Israel has had 4 elections in the last 2 years, and nobody has been able to really put together a viable coalition. The Israeli parliament, called the Knesset, has 120 seats, and in order to get anything passed, you need 61 votes, and nobody has gotten anything near that. Netanyahu's party, the Likud, had 30, and he was first asked to put together a coalition. He was not able to after, I think you get 4 weeks or something to do that. So then Yair Lapid, who had the next number of seats, which was far less than Likud, was asked to put together a coalition. And he was actually about to announce a coalition, which for the very, very first time in Israel was going to include an Arab party. Neither Hamas nor Netanyahu wanted this. Hamas certainly doesn't want to see a situation where Israelis and Palestinians are able to work together. And Netanyahu does not want anyone to take over because otherwise he may very well go to jail. So this actually, was a really good excuse to start some fighting. And what really sparked it, aside from the calling off of the elections, is a number of things. So Jerusalem Day, which is a very important holiday that in Israel, which commemorates the establishment of Israel's control over East Jerusalem, the old city and the Temple Mount from the 1967 Arab-Israeli War, is celebrated with prayer services at the Western Wall beginning last Sunday night. Now, unfortunately, that particular important day coincided more or less with the Muslim Laylat al-Qadr, or Night of Power, which fell this year on last Saturday. It's considered not only the most sacred night of Ramadan, but of the whole Islamic calendar. It commemorates the night when the first verses of the Quran were revealed to the Prophet Muhammad by the angel Gabriel, and is marked by thousands of Muslims gathering at the Al-Aqsa Mosque near the Western Wall on the Temple Mount. Israel was worried that the loudspeakers where the muezzin call for prayer occurred, that those loudspeakers would interfere with the celebrations of Jerusalem Day. So they cut the loudspeakers, the connections to the loudspeakers, which is very provocative. And also, Jewish activists tend to march through the Muslim quarter for Jerusalem Day. It's called a Flags March, and they were going to go through the Muslim quarter. And that is very provocative in the middle of Ramadan, and certainly on that particular day. Netanyahu apparently delayed making a decision about it, and he eventually had that march rerouted, but the marchers went through anyway. Israel also placed police checkpoints at the Damascus Gate, which is the entrance to the Muslim quarter. And they closed the Damascus Gate, again, very provocative at this particular juncture, because Damascus Gate is where a lot of Muslims gather in the evening during Ramadan. So of course, Palestinians started throwing stones, which can be very lethal, obviously, if they're throwing them at people who are praying at the Western Wall. These overlapping sacred dates led to inevitable clashes in the alleyways of East Jerusalem, and culminated last Monday with the Israeli police raiding the Al-Aqsa Mosque, where Palestinians had stockpiled stones. The police chief employed heavy-handed methods. Rubber bullets and tear gas were deployed in the mosque, and hundreds of Palestinians were wounded, while more than 20 Israeli police officers suffered injuries. At the same time, so as I said, it's a perfect storm, so all this stuff is happening at the same time. In East Jerusalem, the Supreme Court was about to announce a decision about families in Sheikh Jarrah. Now, before 1948, Jews owned homes there. This is in East Jerusalem, right? When Jordan took over in 48 and resettled Palestinians who fled or were forced out of West Jerusalem or Israel, and this was with an agreement between the United Nations Relief and Works Agency and the refugees. So a whole bunch of Palestinians were resettled in that neighborhood. In 1968, the Knesset passed a law allowing property owners in Jerusalem to reclaim their assets. So Jews are now reclaiming their homes there. Of course, the same is not true for Palestinians who had owned property in West Jerusalem. So technically, some of these families were supposed to pay rent to the Sephardic Community Committee. These are people who owned property there before 1948, and the rent has not been paid. Now about 300 Palestinians are facing eviction, and the Supreme Court was going to announce their decision about these court cases that have been going on for a long time, but they have delayed that announcement. And so Hamas used all of this as an excuse to start launching rockets at Israel. Now, what is very unusual about what happened this time is that I'll talk more about the war between Hamas and Israel. However, the unrest spread beyond Jerusalem to various mixed cities inside Israel. And in these cities, Jews and Arabs have lived side by side pretty well for many years now. So essentially what started is a civil war. The epicenter of the unrest is Lod, which is a mixed Arab Jewish working class town right near Ben Gurion Airport. Now we had extremists on both sides doing horrible things. Young Arab men firebombed Jewish homes and burned 5 synagogues. They chanted slogans calling for Israel's destruction. Jewish extremists counterattacked, and the violence quickly spread even to Haifa, which was the showcase of coexistence in Israel. Both Arab mobs and Jewish mobs roamed the streets, beating and lynching people, destroying Jewish shops and Arab shops, destroying a fragile but enduring equilibrium. Now, it's not as though these clashes over sacred dates and sacred spaces wouldn't be incendiary enough, but they were also fueled by scenes on TikTok. In April, some Palestinian youths uploaded a short video of them assaulting an Orthodox Jew on public transportation as a way of inspiring copycat attacks. And then in response, a far-right Jewish group named Lahava led a march through Jerusalem to the Damascus Gate of the Old City, chanting, "Arabs get out." So 4,000 rockets were launched from Hamas, which is the most rockets since the Lebanon War. Luckily, the Iron Dome intercepted about 90% of those rockets. Unfortunately, 10% got through and 12 Israelis were killed. Meantime, Israel counterattacked and 230 Palestinians have died in Gaza, 65 of them children. 1,900 were wounded, and the coronavirus is raging in the Gaza Strip, and only less than 2% of Gazans have been inoculated. So the hospitals were already overwhelmed, and now, of course, with all these wounded, they're even more overwhelmed. Some of the hospitals have been destroyed. And so there's tragedy on both sides. I do want to emphasize that most Israelis and Palestinians are not extremists, but moderates. And there have actually been demonstrations of Israelis and Palestinians together saying they want a peaceful solution to the problems. But that doesn't get the kind of news that these more extreme incidents get. So I'd like to read to you most of the statement by Rabbi Rick Jacobs, who's the head of the Union for Reform Judaism. And it's called, "We Hold All of These Truths," because it's a complicated situation. And a lot of the stuff on social media and on the street is very one-sided and doesn't take into account the levels of complication that we have here. He says, "The current wave of violence in Israel and Gaza is a heartbreaking human tragedy. Thank God there was a ceasefire that so far has held, but the loss of innocent life, including that of children, rends the heart. Destruction of homes and endemic fear defy the peace and security in which every human being deserves to live. It's also hard not to feel whiplash with the competing narratives of what caused this latest round of death and destruction. Too many people hold only the other side responsible while having little or no sympathy for their suffering and pain. But we Reformed Jews believe that all of these truths can and should be held together at the same time. So number one, Israel must ensure the security of its people. No country would or should tolerate having thousands of rockets fired at their citizens without responding. We mourn the loss of life of every Israeli killed in this violence, no matter their religion or ethnicity. Israel has the moral authority to defend its own citizens, even if its military might is vastly superior to that of Hamas. And the launching of thousands of rockets at Israel's civilian population and the effectiveness of the Iron Dome in substantially reducing casualties reminds us that US support for Israel is indispensable. 2, Palestinians' rights are essential. As Reformed Jews, we support the human rights of Palestinians. They should be able to live in dignity and safety in their own country. We mourn the tragic death of innocent Palestinians in Gaza. Using stun grenades in the Al-Aqsa Mosque on the holiest night in the Muslim calendar harmed rather than enhanced Israel's security. Our North American Reform movement has long opposed the military occupation of the West Bank, which humiliates Palestinians and causes much daily suffering. So too, we have opposed the expansion of settlements and the annexation in the West Bank and the eviction displacement of Palestinian families in Sheikh Jarrah, elsewhere in East Jerusalem and in the West Bank. Ending the occupation through renewed negotiations between Israel and the PA is essential. 3, Hamas's control of Gaza continues to pose a threat to Israel and to the Palestinians. Life in Gaza is oppressive, for which Hamas's authoritarian rule bears significant responsibility. Hamas remains committed to Israel's destruction. Hamas intentionally shoots rockets from within heavily populated civilian areas in Gaza, in effect making the innocent residents of those areas human shields for Hamas and endangering them. If there were no restrictions on goods flowing into Gaza, Hamas and Islamic Jihad would have far more deadly arms to use against Israel. Despite Hamas's brutality, the US, the international community, and Israel must act to expeditiously ensure humanitarian aid to civilians in Gaza. 4, Iran continues to abet regional unrest and attacks against Israel. Iran has called for the destruction of Israel and supports military operations with Hamas, their ally in Gaza. Iran supplies Hamas and Islamic Jihad with weapons and delights in every rocket shot at Israel and every Israeli killed. 5, fostering healthy democracies and curbing extremism is essential. With Palestinian elections canceled, Hamas is winning the popularity vote. It was actually waning until this incident. The rise of extremism is infecting both Israeli and Palestinian political life, increasing violence and weakening democratic norms. Israel must ensure that perpetrators of Arab and Jew alike be held accountable and ensure at long last an end to discrimination against Israeli Arab citizens and communities that continues in too many areas of Israeli life, providing fully equal government services. And finally, affirming 2 states for 2 peoples and comity between Israeli, Jewish, and Palestinian citizens are fundamental to a peaceful future. Decades of coexistence efforts between Jewish Israelis and Palestinian citizens of Israel have been challenged, but not eliminated by the recent wave of violence. We're proud of the role of many in our own Reformed Jewish community who have built strong partnerships with their Arab neighbors. The current round of violence between Israel and Hamas, as well as in East Jerusalem and in Israeli cities, serves only to strengthen those who oppose peaceful coexistence. So all of these complex realities are true. It's also true that we have a responsibility to work toward a peaceful future for Israelis and Palestinians, rooted in 2 states for 2 people. The realization of that future has been delayed for far too long. There must be sustained resolve to address the root causes plaguing this blood-soaked corner of land. So I would like to now open this up for either questions or comments. It's a complicated, difficult, contentious situation, but we can't give up on it. So does anybody want to offer a comment, ask a question, suggest a
Rabbi, I just want to say thank you for bringing to light more details than I, for one, maybe more of us knew. So yeah, thank you for that insight. It was worthy of our time.
Thanks, Steve. I also have resources I can send people. You can email me, and the Reform Movement and ARTSA, which is our Zionist organization, have held briefings and have shared resources, and I'm happy to share those with people.
I agree with what Stephen said, and I was very pleased to hear what URJ is saying. I strongly agree with everything that you said that was in their what they've sent out.
Thank you, Joan. Harvey says Qatar also gave $1.8 billion to Hamas. So, unfortunately, Hamas and Netanyahu are taking advantage of this situation, because Hamas definitely does not want to lose their power over the Palestinians, and I don't think they care about the Palestinians. Netanyahu is very afraid of being convicted of corruption, so he wants to stay in power no matter what. And it's a very cynical use of violence and death. So it's very, very upsetting. But again, as I said, I think the moderate voices are there as well. And there are people trying to work together. Actually, I got a call today from an imam up in Victorville. We had worked together on an immigration issue. And he called to say he deplored because, as some of you probably know, there was some very awful anti-Semitic incidents going on in LA this past week by people who claim they were pro-Palestinian. And he's saying, no, this is not what we believe in, and we want peace and we want to work together. So there are those voices as well. And as I said, they really don't receive the kind of publicity that the more radical voices receive. Thank you for the comments in the chat. Yeah, Christine.
I was wondering, I know Egypt was very active in helping the diplomatic ceasefire to occur. And I'm just wondering to what extent, well, I know there's lots of diplomacy going on behind the scenes here, but I'm wondering to what extent there are other players not in the immediate surrounding state, but Egypt and perhaps dare I say the Kurds, I mean,
I don't think the Kurds are involved. I don't think the Kurds are involved, but
they aren't involved. But is there any way that you can that we can sort of help mobilize support for that from where we are? My Israeli friends are all labor Zionists, so they're appalled by Netanyahu. But the shocking thing about sort of demonstrations in Haifa is just astonishing.
Yes, Haifa was definitely a model of coexistence.
Yeah, they're really deeply saddened by this, and I'm just wondering, from where we are, what can we do to sort of push an agenda that does sort of, I mean, you can't say a plague on both your houses because you don't want the whole house to get plagued. You just want Hamas and the Likud to get plagued.
Yeah.
But how do we get people to recognize the difference between regimes and people?
Well, I think one thing that we can do is support organizations in Israel that are, trying to be more, moderate and who believe in coexistence. Yeah. And there are many organizations like that in Israel. For example, recently, the Jewish National Fund in Israel, I think that the letters are KKL. It's a different organization from the Jewish National Fund here in this country. They were about to vote to begin acquiring land in the West Bank in Area C. Area C is the area that is neither controlled or, administratively or security-wise by the Palestinian Authority. Areas A and B are those areas. And the more Area C gets, settlements in it, the more impossible it is to create another state, a Palestinian state. And so Rabbi Josh Weinberg, who's the head of ARTSA, asked us to send letters to Hadassah and some other organizations that are on the board of the KKL to say, vote against this. This is just not going well. So, there are moments like that when we can try to oppose what is going to really make it impossible for there to be a Palestinian state. I mean, that's the whole thing with Sheikh Jarrah, this neighborhood. It's in the northern part of Jerusalem, within the city. Evicting Palestinians and bringing in, Jewish, even if they buy the homes, it's just making it impossible for East Jerusalem to ever be the capital of a Palestinian state. The same thing was going on in Silwan, which is in the south. So, if there's any way that we can, write letters to, either the consul general or the ambassador here, or to members of the Knesset to say, we are opposed to this. The only issue right now with that is that once upon a time, I think our voices were more powerful and heard better. Now, I mean, Netanyahu relies much more on the evangelicals than on liberal Jews, But I still think, we do give $3.9 billion a year of aid to Israel. And so if, we say, hey, we're giving you money, so you do need to listen to us to some extent, right? J Street, which is a lobbying organization that is very committed to a two-state solution, also had a conference a few weeks ago. And they asked us to do some lobbying where we're not trying to withhold any funding from Israel. But the idea was, if we're going to give you funding, please be at least transparent about how you're using the military equipment. We don't want it to be used to evict Palestinians. This is different from what is going on in Congress, where there's an effort to withhold some weaponry that was promised to Israel. That's a whole other story. But to at least be transparent, we don't want our money being used to evict Palestinians. So what's going on right now in the West Bank is that there is not de jure annexation. In other words, it hasn't been voted into law, but there is de facto annexation by little incremental purchases. And, that's just not going to lead anywhere good.
Rabbi,
yes.
can I ask a
Ezra,
couple of
please.
questions?
Please.
Where are the Arabs with the courage to say that they're willing to live with the Jewish state of Israel? Who in other words, who can they negotiate with? And the second question I have is, why aren't we pointing the finger at Iran?
I think
The Biden administration is busy trying to loosen the chains on Iran that have been so effective. I mean, that's where all those missiles are coming from.
Of course. All right. Well, first of all, I think Rick Jacobs' statement definitely spoke about Iran being behind this, which, I think is pretty obvious. I think that the Iran, the JCPOA, I can't remember all the letters. Anyway, the nuclear deal with Iran that was negotiated by Obama was supposed to at least delay their ability to get nuclear weapons. And unfortunately, since we pulled out, they have leapt ahead. So I think the idea is to try to delay them and to try to, put some kind of brakes on them. To just do nothing, I'm not sure what we're going to accomplish if we don't do anything with Iran. And I do think their voices for, coexistence in Israel. As I said, you don't hear that as much. Now, Abbas was considered a moderate, and I think he was willing to do some. But yes, we know that every time a state was offered to the Palestinians, especially under Yasser Arafat, it was rejected. So that's definitely true. At the same time, you have to keep trying, because otherwise what's going on now is going to keep happening. And, I'm not a diplomatic expert, so I can't say what the right solution is, but I just don't think, war and bombing, certainly if it does nothing else, it gives us a really bad PR image, right? Right now, I think the world is pretty much against Israel. And I don't think that that's helpful for the cause, but,
Can I pop in here for a second? Two things. One is that the ultra-conservative, ultra-Orthodox Jews in Israel are not happy that Netanyahu stopped the bombing. They did not want a ceasefire. Secondly, Biden, in his most recent speech that he gave today, indicated that the solution is the two-state solution. And he appears to be wanting to go in that direction.
So Jason wrote in the chat, the administration also would like Iran's cooperation in leading a multinational force that keeps Afghanistan peaceful so US troops can come home. Everything is intertwined. Look, Iran and Hamas are terrorists. There's no question about that. And they have no interest in peace, right? There's no question about that. And yes, there's some Palestinians who are, on the extreme end of things, and there are Israelis who are on the extreme end. So, what do? I don't, if I knew, I would be a genius and I would be, negotiating a great peace deal. And as a matter of fact, actually, I thought Kerry had come pretty close with his deal. However, Abbas took Israel to the International Criminal Court and Netanyahu kept building settlements. So that was the end of that. Poof, So, the Palestinian Authority is better than Hamas, right? And we certainly don't want Hamas to take over, in the West Bank, because that's the end of everything. Again, all I can do is present the facts and hope that we can somehow come up with some solution that's, equitable for everybody. And it's eluded people since, even 1947 when the UN split the land. And, that was rejected by the Palestinians and the Arab countries. And, it's interesting that up until this moment, during the last few elections in Israel, there was no mention of the Palestinians, because I think the Israelis thought, we'll just live with the status quo and occasionally there'll be a flare up. Nobody expected this from Hamas. I don't really understand how the Israeli intelligence didn't know that Hamas had so many weapons. And it is true that, yes, there were way more casualties on the other side, on the Hamas suffered, or the people in Gaza suffered. But it is true that Hamas embeds their people within the civilian population. And Israel will warn Hamas, hey, we're about to destroy this building. And I've heard that Hamas will put women and children on the roof so that, they get killed. And then it looks like we're monsters. So it's very, very complicated. And there's no good and bad guys here, strictly speaking. It's just all very complicated and it's very sad. And it's very worrisome too, because I think it has also increased the level of anti-Semitism here. It's another mess.
Someone from the Anti-Defamation League was on TV today talking about that.
And Harvey says Hamas claims to have 8,000 missiles. Well, Iran is supplying Hamas, no question. So, we can't give up hope. Like, who knew that there would be a state of Israel again in 1948, right? So things are possible. Our central story is the Exodus. That means that things don't have to stay the same, that there is hope, there is faith, there is a future, but we have to work towards it. Okay, so I do want to make a special mention of Jason tonight, Jason Winston, who did the tech, and he was asked to do it at the very last minute. He did a fabulous job. So thank you, Jason. He did it last week as well. So thank you so much for stepping in. And I also want to thank Elliot Levine for his beautiful music, his beautiful voice. I hope you saw some nice comments about you in the chat. I'm going to ask Carol Lee to let us know about the Bagels and Lox brunch.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you. I hope everybody has looked at their emails and have seen the invitation to the Bagel and Lox brunch, which is going to occur on Sunday, June 6th. And it's going to be outside. All the COVID things that we have to do, the masks and the keeping away from each other, will be adhered to. We will do it all outside. And if you, and in the email, there is a area that you have to pick what you're going to eat. And we're going to make scrambles of eggs, different kinds of scrambles, and we have different kinds of bagels and some cream cheese and lox, and we'll have lox. And it ought to be fun. We even have a few things to have a raffle. So we're going to make it as much as we can how it was in the past, outside, with keeping with the COVID regulations. The guys are going to cook, and we will have a good time. Now, yeah, thank you. We have to limit this because we only have X number of tables that we can put on the grass. So we are doing it in 2 sessions, 10 to 11:30 and 11:30 to 1. So get your get into it right away. And put in your requests. And Andrea and Johanna Covington and Jessica Ridgway have really set this up really nicely so that it all goes through Andrea. And it's fairly easy to do. I haven't done mine yet, but I hear from other people, I hear from other people that it's easy to do, and you can get in and do it. So please do it and come and join us. It's our only fundraiser, and we love to put this on.
Thank you, Carol.
And it's the first time the whole congregation can really get to see each other in person. So come and join us.
Yes.
Thanks,
So
Carolee.
Can you use some help ahead of time, or during the thing?
Oh, yes. You want to help? Call me up. Yep,
Okay.
absolutely. We
will.
we accept help. We accept easy ups. We accept donations. we absolutely accept everything.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Carolee. I'm sure it'll be a wonderful event, as it always is.
Oh, it will be. It will be.
We do have Torah study tomorrow morning, and June 25th will be our first in-person service with hybrid capabilities. We can't do it before because we have a whole bunch of stuff coming up. We have a family service where the kids have not been vaccinated, so that has to be on Zoom. Amy Pearlstein, our president, is having a bat mitzvah on June 11th. So there are all kinds of exciting things coming up. Does anybody else have an announcement to make before we move on?
Oh, Rabbi?
Yes.
Could we announce that Eric Lesser sent us notification that the bathroom projects are completely finished?
Yes, it was sent out to the whole congregation. We're very grateful to Eric. The bathrooms look great. And the aesthetics committee, of which Christine Liebman is now the chair, have made sure that everything is beautiful. And now the next thing is to figure out where we're going to put all this new equipment that we have to make our services hybrid. And so that'll be the next challenge. And the aesthetics committee is weighing in on where everything has to be put. So thank you for your work on that. And you'll be really happy to see the new bathrooms. The men's room does not smell anymore. Everything's clean. So that'll be really exciting. All right.
We need to make reservations to use the bathrooms.
Right. You need to make a reservation to come to the service. We'll be sending something out about that for the June 25th service. At that point, everyone's supposed to be vaccinated, masked, socially distanced. But of course, June 15th, maybe the whole state's going to open up. So who knows? And the CDC keeps giving us new contradictory information. So who knows? But Jason is the head of the COVID committee, and he's on top of all of that. Right, Jason? Yeah. Okay. We're going to continue with the Aleinu.
עלינו לשבח לאדון הכל, לתת גדולה ליוצא בראשית, שלא עשנו כגויי הארצות, ולא שמנו כמשפחות האדמה, שלא שם חלקנו כהם, וגור עלינו ככל המונם. ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא, שהוא נוטה שמיים ויוסד הארץ, ומשה וקרא בשמיים ממעל, ושכינתו זו בגובה מרמים. הוא אלוהינו אין עוד, אמת מלכנו אפס זולתו, ככתוב בתורתו, וידעת היום, והשבות אליו אביך. כי אדוני הוא האלוהים בשמיים ממעל, ועל הארץ מתחת אין עוד, ונאמר, והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ. ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו אין אחד.
We take a moment now to think of those who are no longer with us. May their memories be for a blessing. We're observing Shloshim for Sandy Schneider and for Jean Maines. And if anyone else is observing Shloshim or the first year of mourning, if you'd like to add a name, either in the chat or unmuted, please do so.
Susan Jones.
Arnie Giller.
Diana Anderson.
Heshie Glick.
Helen Iniguez, Albert Archibald Jr., Joseph Hantman, Brenda Oppenheim, Yaniv Dotan, Janine Lester, Dina Eliason, Julie Eliason, Dulia Poveda,
Pat Costantini.
We're also observing yard sites this Shabbat for Blanche Urbach, Gertrude Ruth Bauman, Diane Nussbaum, Ruth Caron, Daniel Dion Ramirez, Amy Kurland Dorn, Chuck Shanklin, Betty Frankel, Sarah Wall, Joseph Goldware, Morton Oppenheim, Annette Abrams, Stanley Brown, Charles Hunt, Donald Kaufman, Martha Weber, Rabbi Joseph Isaac Atkin, Samuel A. Schur, Charles Gailey Jr., Josephine Diamond, Stanley Diamond. Please add any names. Any other yard sites? Okay, we continue with the Mourner's Cottage. If you'd like to unmute and join me, please feel free to do so.
Amy, my dear.
Yikadal v'yikadash shmei Rabbah. Ve'almad yifrach yechutei v'yamlich malchutei v'chayachon v'yomechon chayei dechol Beit Yisrael v'agala u'vizman kariv imru amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah mevarach le'olam l'omei almaya yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yithadar v'yitale v'yitalal shmei d'kudesha b'richu La'ela min kol bilchata v'shirata tushbachata v'nechemata da'amiran v'alma v'imru amen. Hey Shlama Rabba Min Shemaya Chaim Aleinu ve'al Israel Imru Amen. Aseh Shalom Nimramav Uya Aseh Shalom Aleinu ve'al Israel Imru Amen. May the source of peace send peace to all who mourn and comfort to all who are bereaved, as together we say, Amen. And now I'll ask you to please mute yourselves again as we conclude with another Elliot Levine composition of the priestly blessing.
May God bless you and God.
I'm going to start that again. Sorry. Speaker. There's the speaker turning on. Sorry about that.
May God bless you and guard you. May God bless you and guard you. May the light of God shine upon you. May God be gracious to you, May the presence of God be with you and give you peace, and give you peace, peace. Amen, 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 amen.
And we conclude with the motzi.
Hamotzi lechem min haaretz, we give thanks to God for bread. Our voices rise in song together as our joyful prayer is said. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, hamotzi lechem min haaretz.
Toda Rabbah. Shabbat Shalom to everyone. And if you'd like to stay around to chat, please, you are our guests.